Good afternoon. I'd like to go ahead and call to order our Culpeper County Board of Supervisors, Culpeper County Public Schools budget work session to order. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay. Up first is the board will hear a presentation regarding the proposed fiscal year 24 budget for Culpeper County Public Schools. And before we get started, I'll turn it over to our County Administrator, John Eggerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the board, and welcome to all the school board members in the audience. We will start with a presentation from Dr. Brads. I have given you all a little bit of a preview in past work sessions about what the school's budget requires this year, and it looks manageable, but Tony's going to give you all the details. So, Dr. Brads, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for this opportunity to present the school board's proposed spending plan for FY24. At this time, I'd like for our board members who are present to please stand. Thank you for being here today in support of your budget. And I also like staff to please stand who've been working on this process since actually the last time you approved the budget. Thank you, folks. All of you stand. Ms. Pearl, please stand. Thank you. Okay. Because the budget process actually begins after you approve a budget and we start implementing a budget. It begins right then. And so formally assembling for the next year is in December, as you all do the same thing. So I appreciate all the work that goes into this and certainly the school board assistance along the way. I'm going to go pretty rapidly here. Please stop me, interrupt me if you have any questions. You have the document in board docs. I brought a hard copy if you'd like to scribble on that. Please feel free to do so. I'm going to get right here, get down to business, skip the first couple of slides of how our path rolls in terms of preparing this since our January presentations. But first I'm going to go off slide just a bit. I know Mr. Eggerson's going to get nervous now. I will go right back to slides quickly. But the preamble to this is, and this is probably not a great analogy today of all days, but it's March Madness in Virginia in budget season. I'm not talking basketball, which that may be kind of painful for some folks today with March Madness. I digress. But it's budget season in the Commonwealth, made more complicated by no budget from the General Assembly, and as you're dealing with that as well. However, in a very interesting maneuver, the General Assembly approved what they called a skinny budget, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen them do this necessarily. And so that skinny budget is what was loosely approved in the past, but leave it to the budget negotiators to come back and work on a plan to bring it so that they can bring that forward to the governor. The General Assembly doesn't reconvene until April 12th, which is a significant date for you, but they don't come back to session for the reconvene session until April 12th, unless called back by the governor, and he may call them back if the conferees or the budget negotiators have some information. But all the information that we're saying is, and from the governor's perspective, and I'm not speaking for the governor, but quote after quote, he's disappointed that the General Assembly did not come out of the session with a budget, and that feels like the Commonwealth's in a good place financially to be able to do many important things in the spending plan on the state level, including some tax cuts as well. So we'll see how that goes. So you'll see that on this slide we're talking about estimate of increased revenue. We're using the Senate number. We're using the Senate number because the Senate number gets us closest to and achievable the 7% increase that I think you are looking at as well, that a number of school divisions are looking at. Both houses were talking 7%, but the numbers didn't bear out in the calc tool. So the one closest is the estimate of the Senate. We have to start somewhere. We have to land somewhere, with respect to estimated revenue. That'll make sense when you get to the final line or the final revenue budget, part of the budget. So just wanted to share that with you. So that's the increase, wrong button. Anticipated increase from the Senate. Now, remember, this is not a fixed number. This is not a guaranteed number. We're presenting a plan. You're preparing a plan that is an estimate. And then subsequent to that, if revenues come in from the state lower, then we can't spend what we don't have. And we've been good stewards of spending what we do have and returning excess revenue and underspending expenditures. And we have a really good track record of doing that. So I do want to share that. So in terms of federal revenue, you see nearly a $3 million reduction, and that's because those projects are either completed or no longer available to us. We still have substantial federal funds coming into us for FY24, but certainly a reduction over FY23. An expense that we're faced with, as you are as well, the increase to health insurance at 11% increase for the employer, and our share of that is an increase of just over $1 million, $1.1 million, as you can see on the screen. And we have just over 2/3 participation rate in our health insurance program. And yes, that does mean that 11% premium only increase to the employees. And that's a very low increase, but it is necessarily an increase. We have to work hard to tell our employees not to equate an increase in insurance with their increase to their salary. It's not the same thing. So that's an increase in their premium only that they may have to pay. So we work on that. I'm sure you have to work on that as well, work on letting folks know that as well. This year, because of where we thought we were with being behind market in several classifications, and piggybacked on the county's efforts to do salary and compensation study, benefit study as well. We piggybacked on that, and not exactly piggybacked in terms of not the same study group, but the same company and the same RFP, that we were able to also use Evergreen. And Evergreen helped us compare our historical divisions, 10 of them that we normally compare to, added another 7 divisions that we typically get employment verifications from and say, those folks have gone from Culpeper to these places. And what is an employment verification? When they get there and seek that experience, we have to verify that. So those places we do have people go to from time to time. So we expanded our study group in comparison, and our goal with that study group, as it was a number of years ago when we did Evergreen, was to get to the midpoint of the market. And so when we did that, we found that we had 22 ranges that were 7% or more behind the market. Teachers were in really good shape, actually, not too far behind the market, but also with teachers, as everybody around us move, we need to move as well. And also that our educational supplements, those extra stipends that we pay for master's degree, doctorate degree, and those kinds of things, those were slightly behind as well. So in this proposal, we're based on Evergreen's recommendation, there's an increase to those items as well. This is where we stand currently this year, FY23 comparison in this school year. We worked hard by compressing the beginning of the scale to get Culpeper up. When I first arrived here, we were dead last, so we've moved away from dead last, but you can see we're midpoint and top of the salary range. We're a bit behind. So we think that from the Evergreen study plus what we're proposing in 7%, plus a step will move us up the rankings in terms of that comparison. This is our historical 10-division comparison. We're not listing out the other 7, but we did use the other 7 with respect to the recommendations from Evergreen. So the big item on the list of our 1,160 employees, just about half, are teachers. And teachers very much equate their compensation to their step, to their experience. And so teachers get and pay attention to step and scale, and this is their scale. So the proposal is to move the scale 7% and a step. So you can see from this diagram how if you went from step 6 to step 7 in the next year, or step 21 to 22, and so on and so forth. So those are for teachers.
Looking at this and
Yes,
the
sir.
prior slide,
Yes, sir.
studying the various starting, mid, top, and range width, I'm not a teacher, certainly don't pretend to be knowledgeable along those things, but Albemarle's looks very attractive to me, meaning you have something that has a higher starting salary and a lower width. And the reason that I say that, unless things have changed for the last few years, one of the challenges that Culpeper has is we have some teachers that come here pretty young from other areas, stay here a few years, and then move to other areas where they can make more money. If that's still the case, wouldn't it make sense to, I mean, when I look at our step schedule, so then I go to what we have next, this one that you were just showing, and we, for various reasons historically, now don't do the full step until you get to year 11 or 12. And that seems it's the opposite of what we would do in business. And because a first-year teacher learns a heck of a lot by second year and is a lot better than year one. A 25th year teacher may be better in year 26th, but not as much as a second-year teacher is better than a year one likely. So, but we compensate the 25th year teacher more to get to year 26 than we compensate the first-year teacher to get to the second year. So why?
Great question, sir. Great observation. In terms of getting our bottom of the scale, our entry level was about $35,000, $36,000. We compressed the first 10 or 12 steps a number of years ago.
Right.
And we're slowly trying to uncompress those steps, decompress those. Decompress is probably not the right term, but back to that 1.6%. Because as you look at that, yes, after you get to step 12, it's 1.6. That math is
595
1.6.
technically, yeah.
Yes. Up here, it's now half of that, that's 0.8. It was in the past a 0.5%. Okay, step to step, that's not super attractive. That's why we're trying to move the entire scale so that year over year, those folks that are sticking with us are seeing these kinds of increases year over year. So it's going to take, once you do this indexing all the way through, and that affects all of these other scales, even at the 1.6%, that's another nearly $2 million to fix that in 1 year. So we're trying to fix that gradually at that bottom.
But what about, and maybe this was discussed, if you took the 1.595 and took it to 1.4 and got rid of, and tried to fix it all at once? So essentially what you would be doing is there would be greater increases among those that were earlier in their ladder, less increases in the future among those that are further in the ladder, but it would solve or would help address our attrition problem in that key 3 to 7 year range quite a bit.
Well, yes, sir. We've looked at all of that, and also, but if you say you're going to go to into 1.4 in terms of the scale, the range of the scale, then you're going to have a lot of people maxing out more quickly than other divisions, which sounds attractive, but then they get there and they are stuck unless the entire scale is increased for cost of living.
Or unless you end up with a higher than average starting salary so that all are higher. And so the reason I pointed out I liked Albemarle is they start at all higher, compress that scale, and have it even throughout. So therefore, what you end up with is kind of the same end result. So the highest in Albemarle is similar to here, but you end up with a greater incentive relative to the more junior teachers where there's the greater risk of attrition and where they're really just building the ties to the community unless they're from here.
Our attrition rate is less than that of the state average, so that's good news.
Yes, that's
The
great.
other aspect of it is that when in this range where folks are leaving, oftentimes they're leaving in those early years because they haven't finished their licensure process. Even though we pay 90% for tuition, we do things like that. So I fully understand what you're saying, but we don't have a lot of jumping ship at that lower level. It's typically at the upper level, so we don't want to lock them in and not increase them as well. It's something that we can certainly look at, but we would like to fix the scale at some point to where the increments are even throughout the steps. The range is equal, absolutely.
That's where I'm getting
Yeah.
also would love to do it, and the sooner within reasonable budget we could, I think would be great. And overall, the percentage increase in aggregate teacher compensation, I'm supportive of.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. And then thank you for saying that, because the overall increase from step over year over year, as we want to focus to, and we met with our teacher groups on it, they're focusing on year over year, what is that increase? And if this stands, then the minimum year over year increase is 7.22%. So that's That's good from a perspective of years past. How does it keep it relevant with other divisions, because they're going to move the needle as well? We'll have to come back and look at that again, but I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Some other thing within the salary increase, when the governor's budget first came out on December 16th, there was some information about possibly being a 5% increase, and then later both House and Senate were talking 7%. And so what we've done here is as taken everything that we've talked about on the previous slide with respect to teacher salaries, other categories that are in open ranges that do not have steps, and then increasing them by 5% and a step if that occurs. For example, the only other group right now that's on a step scale are our bus drivers and our bus aides. What this proposes is based on the study that most of our comparative divisions, even those extra 7, they have their paraeducators and their custodians on a step scale as well. So they have some expectation that year over year, there's a step if I stay, and if the scale increases, then that effectively is a cost of living increase, so they get a COLA and a step. And because that's an attrition place for us with custodians and paraeducators, and also trying to hang on to our paraeducators who may want to become teachers. We wanted to fix that to that recommendation, so that's why that number is a little different when we're adjusting the pay ranges, but also moving paraeducators and custodians back to a 30-step scale. In that scale, as we transition, they will go to even even percentages within the steps. So we learned that lesson, and we know that, so recreating that, there will be 1.5% step in all those steps, and we're going to go back to the higher dates so that we place them correctly on the steps. So that's about 265 employees, our paraeducators plus our custodians, to do that, recommended to the step, recommended from Evergreen on putting them on a step scale. Now, having said that, the next slide is going to talk about the next step to get 2% more to get it to 7. So if it should come to pass that the state revenue does not materialize, and I'll say it now, does not materialize, and an adjustment we would have to make from the school board perspective would be we may have to adjust from 7 down to 5. And this slide to this slide, this is how we would do it.
Overall, I mean, I understand to some degree, but a lesser degree. In general, if it's possible to tie something to performance, that makes sense. I realize that experience frequently does that with teachers, and it probably does with paraeducators to some significant degree also. For drivers and custodians, for drivers, accident history and other things are usually, there are other indicators of performance. And for custodians, yes, there's efficiency that comes with time, and I get that, but there's also, there are other things that can be judged relative to the efficiency or, I guess, output of a custodian. So if there's a way, I support the increase, as much as it could be tied to how good of a job they're doing in their roles, the better.
In a number of situations, particularly with classified employees, sir, we do withhold a step increase, going back to steps, so that's new, but we withhold a step increase if there are performance issues or they're on a plan of improvement. So it's not necessarily merit, but there is a way to withhold that. I would use the term to motivate to get that deficiency corrected. So appreciate that.
I'm
yes, sir.
going to agree with everything Supervisor Underwood stated except this, because I think that our bus drivers and our custodians need every penny they can get.
Said I support the money. It's just a question of allocating
Right.
relative to performance, but I'm all for allocating the same amount of money.
Yes.
Right.
So again, I'm not going to read each one of those items. You have them. If you have a question, please let me know. Going to the next page, we're showing some savings there for our voluntary incentive retirement program and some position attrition deferment. Those are negatives on that slide to reduce that number there to get us to 7. So looking at those things, how could we save some money in order to go from 5 to 7? And this slide effectively does that. I will say in this slide also, there is potential for a bonus payment. We don't know what that looks like yet, and we're going to put it on the revenue side and put it on the expenditure side. So frankly, it'll be a wash one way or the other, whether it happens or not. But in the past, when we didn't know bonuses might be coming, we didn't have those budgeted at all. So that we took a total hit when that happened. So we have revenue in, expenditure out on this bonus payment if it withstands the budget negotiators that happens to be there. I know that the governor himself was particularly keen on keeping something in there with respect to retention and paying that in some time of the year in the fall, October, November, if anybody was under contract in 23, came back under contract in FY24, excuse me, that they would be receiving that. So again, back to the state budget, we do not have great details about what's going to come out for FY24. These are the estimates. But we're putting some placeholders in there in the event these things happen, to include but not limited to this 7%. And talking to many of my colleagues across the state, they're building similarly. And I would say we're building similarly because if the supervisors see fit to move forward with this recommendation, you advertise that budget, it doesn't come to fruition, you don't have to go back and advertise again that we're going to spend less money. If we would say 5% and there's a windfall and we come to you and say, wow, the state's sending us more money, we want to adjust this up, then you have a problem of going back out having to advertise that and increase. So hopefully that's not going to be the case. We're again, really feel confident that what is sitting in the skinny budget now is not what the final numbers are going to be. They're going to be higher numbers as requested by the governor and what the conferees or the budget negotiators are working on. Additional positions this year that we added unbudgeted, have to add them back into the budget this year. We'll add positions within a budget, within a spending plan, and have to book them as FTEs, full-time equivalent, for the next year. Next slide talks about some new positions, brand new positions. Those 5 at the top, they're brand new for FY24. And then the remaining 8 that you see there, they've been funded for 2 years in ESSER 2, and these are positions that we want to continue to have, and so they are recommended to be in the budget. And in terms of year over year, it's a matter of reshuffling how we're handling our expenditures and based on what the new revenues look like. So we can make this happen with this transfer. Now, you're going to start to see a lot of negatives, and that's where positions are coming out. They're coming out of federal money, but the revenue is coming out as well. Those deductions actually help us get to this point of budget over budget being able to do these things. So the next slide talks about those coming out of ESSER and coming out of the budget, some of which are going into the operating budget, some are not. So that's a $1.3 million savings on that page. Next page, there's some capital there, non-recurring expense of 2.7. That's ESSER going away on total revenue. And the one-time school construction funds, that's going away for next year. That was a state-funded item. Again, I'd pause here and say thank you to Mr. Eggerson and staff for working with us to be able to place that towards a project, the CMS roof, and also placing that into the CIP so that we could use that in the future instead of having to worry about giving that back to the state or however they were going to do that, because doing that in FY23 was quite unprecedented to give us $3 million plus for school construction projects. So that comes out. We left this slide a little bit messy on purpose for transparency when we started the process. There was an additional $2 million, 2.2 in the operating budget. We don't want this to live in operating because they are one-time things. They are replacement cost items, sometimes on a 3-year cycle, sometimes on a 5-year cycle. So we started the conversation with them, showing them, but then, again, thank you to working with Mr. Eggerson and his staff and taking these items out. And from this slide, you can see the items that we're talking about are either going to be booked to the school textbook fund or the school capital fund. So that reduced that expenditure $2 million, which helped us in our planning process to do something different with that revenue from the previous year, if that makes sense.
That's true, and that makes sense, but if you're increasing the expenditures from the school capital fund, there's going to be an amortization schedule associated with that. So having reserves that would go through almost the operating side, because what you have is, I mean, let's say that the laptops and Chromebooks last an average of whatever they may be, 3 or 5 years. Then rather than saying we have a hit every 3 or 5 years, we ought to say we have a 33% hit each year or a 20% hit each year.
And, yes, sir, we're doing that because we fund the textbook fund annually.
Right.
We're doing this extra because of the turnback money in 1 year of deposit, because we have, I don't want to use the term enterprise fund, however you all use that fund, but our textbook fund
Yes.
is a fund that can gain, right? It's not, it doesn't revert to the county. The textbook fund has money in it. We put money in that every year for textbooks. Now that Chromebooks are an eligible expense for textbooks, that's where that's coming.
Okay,
So
I get that. They are the
So
textbook.
they are the textbooks, yes, sir. So you think of it as technology, but now they're the textbooks.
Right.
Yes. But
Great.
good observation. There's other things in support of, I like to use the term the wiring and the switches for technology. That doesn't count for textbook. It has to be a device that has the information on it, or a teacher device. We have teacher laptops, as you see, school textbook fund. It has instructional material on it as well. That can be in the textbook fund. But core routers, those kinds of things, that's $160,000 right there for those two items. That can go to school capital now that we have some flexibility in moving that to school capital. And I appreciate the help with the county administrator on doing that. So, but we are making annual deposits to that textbook fund because it's becoming our reserve. When we first stood up with your support, school board support and your support, the Chromebook initiative initially, that came out of textbook. That wasn't funded by an additional appropriation. That was funded from textbooks. Rather than doing a textbook adoption, we did Chromebooks. And from time to time, as you probably have heard, the state kind of can drag their feet on adoption of curriculum. So social studies curriculum still up in the air. So at some point in time, there will be a social studies adoption that we will have to complete, and that could be in the neighborhood of $1.2 million, $1.5 million for all the materials to update your social studies. But that's why you have your textbook fund building along the way, so that you can do one of those large adoptions. Along the way, if you're pulling out for some technology, you've got to be careful that you're placing enough back into that fund, just as Mr. Underwood said. Some other items that were increased: fuel cost, those some rent increases, service contract. When we go out to third party for some contracting, those contracts have gone up a bit, but we cut that down tremendously by adding to the school capital fund the purchase of 5 diesel buses. So that is there now. Again, appreciate the help on that. So what does all that look like? And that looks like the increases in expenditures of $2.1 million. The revenue summary with the decrease in federal, but the increase in state, and a small decrease in miscellaneous revenues locally. And think about that as rents and rebates and those kinds of things that we receive from other folks as a school division. We've lowered our estimate over last year of how they're coming in. So this presentation is an unbalanced budget technically, but it's balanced in the presentation by the respectful ask of $1.2 million to make it a balanced budget request. So when the next slide shows that 1.2 is a 3.8% increase over previous appropriation. And what does that look like in the grand scheme of things? That's the magic right there. Year over year, all of that spending shuffled to the new revenue opportunity from 212 million to 114 million. That's the difference. Part of making up that difference is the request of the county for that 1.2 and that 3.8% increase. That shows how that goes into expenditures. And if you look, as appropriately, 88.8 million in instruction. And that's where we pay most of our folks out of instruction. Most of them are in instruction or instruction support. You can see the other categories, obviously, with pupil transportation, operation and maintenance, but the bulk of our spending is in support of instruction, as it should be, and we stand by that.
To me, that slide where you have, what we're really seeing is No, the one that you were just on.
That one, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. The primary categories, instruction being the biggest, but across all, you're seeing about a 5% increase until you get down to the facilities. And
Yes.
so essentially, the true amount that the budget is going up is, excluding the one-time facility expense, is a little more than 5%. But that makes sense, because that's the inflation. That's consistent with what we're increasing the funding for instruction, for teachers, and for all the other categories. So the reason it's important to note that is, unless things change, we're on a 5% trajectory now, so when you're sitting here next year, we may be looking at not something as narrow for the county, we may be looking at something a little more.
Yes.
So,
Great observation, sir. And thank you for pointing out the anomaly, that is facilities. That was where the state money came in, that 3.8, that one time. That's why that looks a bit odd. Next slide. We've worked together with county administrator and Sam on adjusting the 5-year CIP. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to have additional future project line that if items go over, we can go to that line, or items come up that we need to go to that category, coming to you for approval, of course. But if some of the categories are underspent, then they could go into that additional future project line that's down there at the bottom fourth of the page of that 1.147. So I appreciate that. And our discussion, and we're still working on related to major capital projects, moving out Culpeper Middle out to FY25 and continuing the conversation on the best path forward on that. So absolutely, the board supports that. So they supported this in their meeting yesterday, so appreciate that. This was my slide from the board. I apologize I didn't change this slide. This was board action to us if they had any changes in their action, approving this recommendation to bring to you today. And we are here at 316. The rest becomes detail of how does this go into our categories and our lines, our actual general ledger lines. So you have all that. I'm not clicking through 50-some slides, but they're there for you. So at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, and I appreciate your time this afternoon.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the thorough explanation. It looks like the school board has done the best they can with the current inflationary environment, and in general, I'm supportive of where we are.
Any other comments? Well, we appreciate your presentation, Dr. Brads, and appreciate like Supervisor Underwood said, the care and the due diligence that the school board put into this, and we appreciate you coming today.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And to reiterate, a lot of hands went into this, and you all know that, and I appreciate them and getting me to this point to be able to attempt to explain this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, up next is the update from our County Administrator, John Eggerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought I would take just a couple of minutes and a few slides this afternoon to sort of paint the picture of where the budget is, especially in light of now the school's budget being clear and being incorporated, and really this leads into the third item on the agenda, where I'll be asking you to consider advertising this budget and proposed tax rates. So let me just run through these quickly. In terms of the big picture, our total budget figure for FY24, as I told you at our last meeting, will be a fairly substantial increase from FY23. A couple of things to think about in that number going up, however, is that the capital improvements plan has a lot to do with that, and included in that capital improvements plan, there's $5 million for the pool project, which is coming entirely from the town. There's also a $5 million set aside for potential investment at Coffeewood should that facility be secured for use by the county. And so those two $5 million chunks have a lot to do with the fact that the capital improvements plan is $7.4 million higher this year than last. Just talking a little bit about our fund balance picture, the FY24 budget has a proposed operational budget of around $209 million under our financial policies of keeping the fund balance at 10 to 15%. And that 15% would require about $31.3 million on hand. And as of June 30th of 22, we had a balance of $47.6 million, less the $17.5 million for our CIP projects would leave us right around $30 million or 14.4%. So still well within our fund balance policy. And we've talked a lot about the real estate reassessment that did take place for this year's budget. The average increase was a whopping 27%, with there being a little bit higher increase on the residential side and a little bit lesser on the commercial and agricultural side. But that increase raises the value of 1 penny of real estate tax to $819,000, and our equalization rate would then be from 55 cents currently down to 44 cents. The budget I am recommending to you today is a 46-cent tax rate, so a 2-cent increase in real estate tax. That chart you've seen before, that just did that breakdown I mentioned of residential versus commercial, industrial versus agricultural, and the average being 27% for increase in reassessment value. The schools, I won't dwell on this slide, as Dr. Brad's just very nicely laid out their request. It is for $1,282,894 additional local dollars from the current year for the FY24 budget. And that is incorporated within the budget that I am proposing. The salary adjustments on the county side, Dr. Brads and I always try to line those up and make them pretty close. We have a cost of living increase at 6.75%. That's across the board. That has an impact on our budget of about $1.8 million. We also have merit increases that average a little better than 1%. So we're really, on a countywide average, looking at just pretty close to 8% on the increases. In terms of the total budget for FY24, it's a $231.2 million budget in total, inclusive of CIP, schools, and everything else. That's about $19 million higher than the current year budget, which was $211.5 million. Again, CIP projects comprise $7.4 million of that increase. There's $5.5 million in new state revenue, and our local increases from real estate tax, personal property in terms of revenue projections are about $9.5 million. There was actually a decrease of federal revenue, and that's the ESSER funds primarily from the schools that are those federal funds being decreased. So in terms of the tax rates, we're recommending no changes to the personal property tax rates. We are, as I just mentioned, suggesting that the real estate tax be a slight increase. We will be needing to generate, in order to balance this budget, about $1.7 million in additional revenue above what we would have with the equalization rate. So this budget does call for an increase of 2 cents from the equalization rate of 44 to 46 cents. And that is my summary, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Valerie and I can answer any questions you might have at this point, but most of that was probably a review of things that you've heard previously, so that is where we stand.
First question I have is, have we received the January meals tax estimate yet?
I don't think we've received a good one, Mr. Underwood. They're trickling in, but Valerie hasn't seen a true figure at this point.
Yeah, the commissioner hasn't provided me any additional information at this point, so.
Okay, it would be good. What were the original estimates of that?
They were wildly varied, Mr. Underwood. The state had a number that was, to me, completely unrealistic at 4 million. I estimated we'd be lucky to make half of that in a year's time, but at this point, I would not be comfortable at all. If you want to project some revenue from meals tax, I wouldn't project more than probably $500,000 until we see what happens.
While I don't have perfect information, I'm aware that we did have some challenges with collections. Letters had to go out. There are things still changing in the county relative to compliance. So there will be a ramp as people get used to it. That said, I agree with you about the state. If we get 4 million, great. 2 million is optimistic. I believe we could reasonably figure 800 grand this year. And if we can, and even if we're off slightly, we have a very healthy general fund balance. But if we can, we could, because things are so much better known now, with us having more information from the schools, us having fine-tuned a lot of other stuff, we could advertise a 45-cent rate, it'll be more comfortable for the constituents. We likely have the revenue to cover it, where we're not reducing the general fund. And in the current environment where a lot of other things are going up, I think it would send a good signal.
I hear you, Mr. Underwood, and the board is clearly that's a path forward. If that's the one you wish to take, I won't recommend it to you. I feel that even going down to 46 cents is a little bit nerve-wracking. That's going to be an extremely low real estate tax rate.
While it's a low real estate tax rate, with an average residential increase of 29%, it still means that because equalization was relative to 27, equalization would equal an average residential tax increase of a little more than, it'd probably be about 3%.
That's accurate, yes, sir.
So if we're doing 3% before we increase, and we then are going to go from 44 to 45, we're really talking about a 5% residential real estate tax increase at 45. And if we're finding ways to get everything else there, if we could get real estate there, I think it'd send a great message.
I would argue that, at least for purposes of the advertisement, you might want to stick with the 46, because you can't go up after the ad, but you can go down.
I've heard that many, many times, but fortunately, you and staff and school staff have done such a good job that we have certainty and don't have to worry about more than 45.
Well, I'm going to agree with Supervisor Underwood on that. I mean, I think it would send a good signal, and I think our citizens need that. Many of our citizens need that that extra help that we could provide them. And with our reserve fund being as healthy as it is, I think we have recourse if the meals tax comes in less than $800,000 or $1 million. So I support that outlook.
So I do have a question about some of the surrounding counties. Where are they at within their equalization? Are they raising or just staying at equalization?
I do not know the answer, Mr. Juneau. I'm not sure how many counties are doing doing reassessment this year at all, but
Mr. Because of an advertisement issue, I had some constituents that were confused by us having the 2023 rate and having that 55 cents. So I started calling around to other county assessors' offices and seeing what they were doing. And we'll improve the messaging hopefully in 2 years from now. so that our constituents aren't confused, but Stafford, Spotsy, Madison are not in a reassessment year, so we're a little bit unique.
Mr. Chairman, while I don't necessarily disagree with everything y'all have said, I think that it may have been said here once, but you always have the opportunity to go down. If we're not having a good handle on what might be coming from the meals tax, I don't know that that's a good idea. If we wait until we get to the public hearing process, maybe we can get closer to what that figure may be. I'm sure that there's some of them out there that are not paying it, and I think it's gonna take a while to get them on board with paying it. But I think that we should go with the 46 cents at this point in time.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have to agree with Supervisor Underwood on this. I think that in light of what the citizens of Culpeper have been enduring for the past year when it comes to the inflation rate, we talk about our assessments with the residential. I can tell you there's a lot of commercial, which is the backbone of our tax base, when we look at how they've been impacted. And I've gotten calls anywhere from 40, 50, one of them was 90% increase on a commercial property. You know, I do understand that with the meals tax, that it's going to take a while to get the bugs worked out. And I don't disagree with our county administrator that that was a pretty healthy prediction from the state at $4 million. But, you know, if hindsight being 20 years ago, have we known that, you know, some of the tourist things in the county with the breweries and wedding venues and such, I think that once these bugs are worked out, that we're going to see that that probably is a lot more than the 800,000. So again, I would support Mr. Underwood's proposal at 45 cents.
I think I'd like to compliment the county staff and the schools for the budget work that they've done and what information we've had. I think they've done a great job. I support our county administrator in the 46 cents. I think we need to stay there until we know just what this meals tax will be. We may have a better handle on that by the time we get to the public hearing. And if that's the case, we can come down at that time. But at this point, I would support staying at 46.
Spoken, then Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we advertise for a public hearing to be held on April 18th, 2023 at 7 p.m. regarding the fiscal year 24 budget, and at 7:30 p.m. regarding the proposed tax rate, and that we advertise the tax rates as recommended by you with the exception of a real estate tax rate combined of the fire rescue and the rest of 45 cents.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Aye. Okay. Well, we have a 3-3, so I guess we'll fails. We'll have to come back at another time.
Well, I think Mr. Chairman, in order to meet our 30-day deadline and advertise this public hearing for April 18th, we would like to have a decision today. I think there just needs to be maybe a little more discussion, or I'm not sure how to handle it with the deadlock, but
I'll handle it with the deadlock. I would strongly prefer the 45. We can go down. We'll have the other member then. We need to meet the deadline. I don't want us to lock us up, so I'll amend my motion to make it 46 cents to get to the hearing. I support 45 when we get there, but I don't want us to get stuck on this.
I'll second the amended motion.
Well, I'll support that too, but I am all in favor of the 45 cents. So I go ahead and call the question. All in favor of the amended motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Underwood, thank you for that. It is critical. We had some kind of advertisement, but Valerie and I will plan accordingly to be prepared for the potential addition of some revenue from the meals tax and the reduction of the real estate tax.
Okay. So, John, I think we took care of C, right? So
Yes, sir, we did.
down to D, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We added this last item. It was discussed at the Public Works Committee last week, and due to some time sensitivity, we wanted to get it in front of the board today. So I'm going to ask Sam to come forward and just give us a quick summary of what's being requested. And then Mr. Underwood's the chairman of the Public Works Committee. He can also speak to it as well.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. While this doesn't reflect a budget proposal directly, it does involve money, and
Mr. Chairman, real quick, I'm sorry, if the school group do want to leave, as some are, how about we give just 30 seconds for any of those that, just to... Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Eggerson stated it was last week. It might have felt like it was last week, but I think it was just Monday we were discussing this. But the Public Works Committee, did discuss ongoing studies that we've been doing for collector roads, primarily Riva Road, White Shop Road, Stevensburg Road, and then there was a fourth study to look at a western collector connection between 522 and Route 29. Those have advanced, those framework studies have advanced along the way. The Public Works Committee has looked at those framework studies, the initial part of it. We're looking at gearing up to make revenue sharing applications this year. Pre-application deadlines are June 30, so it's a pretty tight turnaround. We have to have something in the portal that VDOT works with for those funding applications. When we got the framework study back, it indicated that for Riva Road and White Shop specifically, those both had identified V-Trans safety need segments. There were a number of accidents on each road. Stevensburg Road as well. As you know, Stevensburg Road has been in our comp plan before. It is around this time again to potentially improve that as well. There was debate whether to keep that one on as far as revenue sharing applications, and I believe the Public Works Committee rested on going towards what they would get more bang for their buck as far as safety needs. That involves the next phase of building applications, the Riva Road package to develop some concepts that would be submitted for revenue sharing would be at around $95,000 for the consultant to continue forward, and then around $75,000 for White Shop Road. What we don't have a scope of services for is Stevensburg Road improvements right now. I'm happy to go into details. Posted on board docs were those the scope of services for the next phase to develop those revenue sharing application concepts for Riva and White Shop. As I mentioned, there's not one for
The
Stevensburg.
only thing that I would note with that is relative to Stevensburg, we are prepared, meaning that we were prepared to submit last year. So as we need this, we're not prepared for White Shop, we're not prepared for Riva. If this board should decide in May or June that they prefer to do Stevensburg, the information is available to go in the portal as it is right now. So what we're really asking is to have it ready so that the board can deliberate among the three that we've prioritized for quite a while in order to submit a revenue sharing application before the deadline in June.
Sure, the only thing, that Supervisor Underwood is that right on, as we have just studied that. That was previous pre-application work that was done prior application cycle. The only danger there would be that we probably are going to exceed our dollar amount that we can apply for.
We can't do all three. I'm not saying we
So-
could do all three.
So we'll end up having to make a decision anyway for the corridors, because as you know, that corridor improvement was slated that would eaten it up, the whole kit and caboodle with Stevensburg Road. This does move the planning forward for White Shop and Riva Road, potential spot improvements at intersections as well as corridor improvements, potentially even realignment for some portions of Riva Road. So, happy to entertain questions, but it does. Didn't want to wait till April because there is work involved that the consultant needs to get going on, and they'll probably start tomorrow if we give them the go-ahead tonight. So,
Thing I would note is the board has previously approved a contract with this consultant specifically. So what we're asking for is we didn't want something this size of an expenditure, we would at least like board consensus for that.
and the monies to date that we've used with the consultant have been basically leftover monies from previous projects that were under the secondary 6-year plan. So that money's already been appropriated and has been used for this. And a portion of those funds would be used for this. We would probably need to dip into the revenue sharing line that's already been appropriate from last year to move it forward completely.
All right, so you don't need a motion, but we need consensus. Is that what I'm hearing?
I do have a question. So we're actually looking at creating new roads around Riva Road.
There will be a couple of segments of Riva Road that we're looking at a potential, basically there's curvature issues with certain sections of Riva to straighten those curves out. That's going to be a possibility. Right now, we don't know if we would apply for that type of realignment or not, but it is a possibility.
So how many landowners would be impacted?
2.
Not very many with
Okay.
the segments that we're looking at.
I would, for full disclosure, I would be one of the 2. But if it were proposed, I would donate anything that was wanted. The other landowner is an estate that goes to Glebe Way, that Mr. Bates was there when we discussed what the alignment would be. I've discussed it with that landowner. There would not be a donation, but there would likely not be tremendous objection. So it's possible to work with them. But if we want to keep the old, that's what the consultants need to look at and tell us.
Yeah, they're geared up with the scope of services that you're looking at here to do an either-or scenario to provide some cost-benefit analysis for those segments. So.
And then as far as Stevensburg Road, I still want to stress to the fact that Stevensburg Road is the gateway from Route 3 to our high school, to our field house, to our upcoming swimming pool. It's a cut through to Route 29. We cannot keep kicking the can down the road. I know that the whole thing would be eating up the entire budget, but we need to start making headway on it, or it'll just keep getting bigger and bigger and getting worse and worse and worse. I honestly avoid it at all costs. I go 5 miles out of my way because it scares me to death being on it with trucks coming through and cars coming through. Like, it's not wide enough. It definitely needs addressed.
I agree.
Mr. Chairman, I would assume that this would be viewed the same as you would with a 6-year road plan improvement, that if without dedication right away, more than likely will not move forward. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. Obviously, if you have donation of right-of-way or willing right-of-way partners, that process and that project can be built a lot cheaply and easier. But a lot of times when you're looking, especially with a realignment or even an expansion of road to cover some geometry issues with the road, they're going to weigh in the cost of right-of-way for purchase as well for these projects. So that was the case with Stevensburg Road, and that was one of the numbers that was fairly large, actually, looking at that line item. So.
I'm aware of roads that were never improved that were on the 6-year road plan because of the refusal to dedicate right away.
These wouldn't necessarily go through the 6-year road plan as far as that stream of funding.
They're not, but there are roads that we are pulling that would have been on the 6-year road plan and using revenue sharing in order to move them up the ladder and get them moved.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
In general, Chairman, I support Mr. Rosenberger's approach. So to the extent that we can do it, I'm all for it. And if there's a section where it cannot be done, but the landowner owns both sections. Sometimes in those cases, like Hudson Mill Road 96, there was a small purchase. When we did the outer loop, there was. So I'd like to have look at the safety and the traffic figures and the incremental cost when we get there, but dedication is by far superior.
All right, I think we have consensus to go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, any other comments before we adjourn? Okay, meeting adjourned.